All right, so today we're on class 2 of, Eastern religions, and we're going to be discussing Buddhism, but also what is called Chinese popular religion. I'm going to go over some of the different forms of what's called Chinese popular religions, primarily Confucianism and Taoism. And then we're going to close up with a brief treatment of Shinto, which is Japanese traditional religion. So we'll start with Buddhism, and a lot of this is going to be reviews. I know most of everybody has already read on this, but started with Siddhartha Gautama, the awakened one, the enlightened one, if you will, born into a ruling clan of people, living a life of ease and protected from all knowledge of human misery. Now this legendary chariot ride that he supposedly took, there's all kinds of, and we're going to see this throughout all the systems that we're going to study today, that it's a mixture of mythology and legend and history, and we're not really even sure exactly what happened and what didn't happen. There's enough evidence to say that this man did exist and that he was the father of Buddhism. This chariot ride, it's said, first of all, that his father kept telling him that he could not go out. Because when he was born, that he was given an omen that he was either going to become a great king or a great priest. And his father didn't want him to become a great priest. His father wanted him to become a great king, so he kept him in the courts at all times, didn't let him out. As he got older, he wanted to go out. He wanted to see what was out there, and his father didn't want him to. And this sort of went back and forth and back and forth. And his father finally said, okay, fine, you can go out and see what's out there. But that his father beforehand sent his men out to clear out the streets, didn't want him to see any dead bodies, didn't want him to see anybody in pain or suffering, didn't want him to see anything negative, and it supposedly cleared out the streets so that as he went through, he wouldn't see anything that would disturb him. And whether or not this took place on one chariot ride or it was 4 separate chariot rides, there's varying accounts of how this happened, but he saw an old man. He had never seen an old man before, only his father, who was probably not, that old. His father was probably the oldest man that he had seen. Had never seen a very, very old man. Had never seen anybody that was really sick. He saw somebody who was suffering from some kind of disease, who was probably dying. And then he saw a funeral procession with a decaying corpse. And finally he saw a priest in meditation, living an ascetic lifestyle. And he was shocked. He didn't know what to do with it. He had never seen these things before. He had never seen suffering. He had never seen pain. He had never seen somebody choosing to live an ascetic lifestyle, choosing to live a life of, eschewing any kind of comfort. So this was all very shocking to him, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he went on about a 7-year pilgrimage, saying a 6 or 7 year pilgrimage, where he was, remember, being born into Hinduism. So he's studying Hinduism, and he's studying the Hindu practices, the Hindu traditions, and the Hindu philosophies, and studying with the Hindu priests, which are very ascetic, very, much about suffering and selflessness and pushing away all comfort. And he grew tired of it, and their answers. It didn't give him any satisfaction, didn't give him any peace. So he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, which is basically a fig tree, up in northern India, and he suddenly experienced enlightenment or an awakening. And he discovered what he calls the middle way, which is neither luxury nor self-deprivation. He lived in luxury, it didn't give him any peace. He lived in self-deprivation, it didn't give him any peace. So he figured that the answer was the middle way. He was living in the middle of the road. So he created what's called the Four Noble Truths. And these are the Four Noble Truths. To live is to suffer. This is not a very positive, this is not a Norman Vincent Peale type of philosophy. This is looking at life in a very negative fashion. To live is to suffer. All life is tough. Existence is painful, and even death does not stop suffering because you're just going to come back and do it again. You're going to be reincarnated. Suffering is caused by desire. Our greed and attachment to the impermanent and illusionary things of the world lead to hatred, ignorance of true reality, which he felt was non-existence. And we're going to explain that a little bit more, that in reality we don't exist. And that's why we suffer. That's why, because we have this desire for something, and so it causes the suffering. The only way to cease suffering, since suffering is caused by desire, is to eliminate desire. Eliminate all selfish desire. Once we don't cling to desire, pain of existence will be gone, and the fires of greed, hatred, and ignorance will be blown out. And the final of the Four Noble Truths is that desire is eliminated by following the Eightfold Path. So it's sort of a progressive thing. To live is to suffer. Suffering is caused by desire. Suffering will only cease if we can eliminate desire. So we've got to eliminate desire, and we do that by following the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is this: the right view, which is just understanding truth of existence. Right intention, being willing to achieve enlightenment. You have to want to be enlightened. Right speech, speaking clearly and truthfully. Right action, performing proper actions, avoiding immorality. And by immorality, it's not saying sin, because there really is no such thing as sin, but immorality is, he's referring to doing harm against other people, or doing harm against yourself. We have a concept of immorality as being sin, which is violating God's law. And just so, even though we're using the same word, he's not talking about violating any divine law. It's just, committing a crime against somebody else. Lying. We'll get into some of that when we get into the Silas.
Then, do they actually have a moral code?
Yeah, we're going to get into the Silas. That's what the 5 Silas is sort of the moral code of Buddhism, which sort of explains what we're talking about. We're talking about immorality. Right livelihood, living simply, having an honest occupation, in other words, the middle road, not making too much, not being in poverty. Right effort, directing one's energies properly. Right mindfulness, meditating properly, controlling thinking. Right concentration, maintaining continuous focus, form, and content of meditation are crucial to understand reality. So the Eightfold Path, following these 8 right paths, if you will, is what will help you to eliminate desire. If you follow these steps, it will help you to eliminate desire. If you eliminate desire, then you'll eliminate suffering. Major sacred texts. There is the Tripitaka, okay, which is it's the 3 baskets. And what you have is the Vinaya basket, which is a code of ethics for monks and nuns. And what we'll see is that all of this philosophy really is directed for monks, for those who seek this lifestyle. It's not for your typical everyday person out in the world. It's really designed for enlightenment, because only monks and those dedicated can achieve the enlightenment.
But if they're not dedicated and they're not monks, then they're really not Buddhists, are they?
Right. And we're going to see that, because what we run into, well, they can be now, because we're going to run into, there was some divisions when it comes to Buddhism. But as far as the original intent of Siddhartha Gautama, as he wrote it in these, these writings, it was really intended for the monks and the nuns. The Sutra Pitaka The Basket of Threads is just accounts of Buddha's teachings. And also, these things were not, he didn't write these. These were almost like the Quran. These were things that his followers wrote down what he said. And then they said, here, let's put these things together. Again, they were compiled probably 500 years after his death. And then the Abhidharma Pitaka, Basket of Scholasticism, which are philosophical works. These are the primary works. So there are other historical figures are Ashoka, which is an Indian emperor, who he was the first ruler who really embraced Buddhism and spread it by sending missionaries as far as the Mediterranean. And he was very enthusiastic about the idea of Buddhism and thought there was something that needed to be spread. And then Nagarjuna was an Indian philosopher, founder of the Madhyamak school, considered the most influential Buddhist after the Buddha himself. Key beliefs: purpose of life and salvation. Buddha's awakening under the Bodhi tree caused him to immediately begin his teachings, known as the Dharma, the underlying order of truth and existence. Okay? The fundamental principle is summed up in this: all life is suffering. Again, that's like the revelation that he got, that all life is suffering, and it's all about eliminating the suffering. He separated himself from Hinduism by eliminating the caste system. He didn't believe that there were different levels of people should be treated differently. You know, he believed in the equality of everybody. And he also rejected the Vedas as being authoritative. That's why he, while being raised a Hindu, we're going to see a lot of Hindu beliefs in Buddhism, he is not considered a Hindu because he rejects the Vedas and he rejects the caste system, which are in the Vedas. But that doesn't mean the Hindus necessarily have a problem with it, because remember, the Hindus, hey, we believe this is the way, and but if you don't believe in it, that's okay, because we believe you can fit into this whole system anyway. Even if you don't know that you're fitting into the system, you can fit into the system. Because again, it's more of a philosophy. And even if you don't practice the things, you can't be considered Hindu. But if you live the right kind of lifestyle, you can still move your way up in samsara and be released.
Is it even really a philosophy if it doesn't make sense?
Well, yeah.
Pluralism doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. But and remember what pluralism is, and this is what came up in some of the papers too. Pluralism isn't necessarily belief that everything is true. It's believing that there's a truth out there, but we don't really know it. So long as it doesn't matter what you believe, because nobody really knows what is real anyway. So long as we all believe something, that's enough. So everybody's okay. We include everybody in because nobody really knows. We've got the noumena, remember the noumena and the phenomena. Nobody really knows what the noumena is. So everybody's kind of in the same pool. We're all just living on the phenomena that we were given. So it's not, now Hinduism is pluralistic, but Hinduism is more of sort of that big basket of saying, well, it's all true. It's pluralistic in the sense that everybody's all in one basket, but Hinduism believes that multiple things can be true. And even though it doesn't make sense, we struggle with it. I mean, I agree. From the standpoint of logical arguments, it does not make sense. But
are there any other kinds of arguments?
Well, yeah. Eastern religion, the Eastern mind, believes in the both and that it doesn't have to make sense. That when it comes to issues, but yet they contradict themselves because they would not use that same principle if they were flying a plane. They would use the law of non-contradiction if they were flying a plane. You know, that's one of Alistair Begg's illustrations. You know, what's your altitude? I don't know. You know, I don't know what it is for me. I know what it is for me. I don't know what it is for you. I think I'm at 5,000 feet. What do you think? No, you're not at 5,000. You're at 10,000. Okay, that's your opinion. They wouldn't use that in that context, but when it comes to faith, issues of philosophy and religion and faith, they choose to use a new set of rules for determining reality. So, but as in Hinduism, salvation, if you will, I mean, again, salvation we use loosely because it really means freedom, liberation from samsara. Depends on meditation, becoming a monk, and so on, sort of that ascetic lifestyle. Traditionally, only male monks can attain salvation, which is the release from the painful cycle of reincarnation. Salvation basically is called nirvana, which is being blown out like a candle. This goes a little bit beyond Hinduism. Hinduism talks about that Atman that is in you. You finally realize the Atman. You realize the God, that piece of God that is within you, and then you're returned to Brahman, the drop of water, you know, the raindrop that falls in the water. Whereas in Buddhism, you cease to exist, because that's reality. Reality is that things don't exist, and that what we're experiencing here is what's called Maya. We're going to see that in a minute. It means nothingness. It means illusion. And I think we talked about that in Hinduism
Right.
too.
So how can an illusion project from nothing?
Again, it's the Eastern mindset doesn't want to be bothered with, you know, laws of logic and reason, because they feel that laws of philosophy and religion and deities go beyond reason, beyond words, beyond things that we can express. You know, the Buddhist concept of nirvana really resembles an atheist concept of death. It's a cease of existence, it's the annihilation of personal existence. You know, this state of non-existence is called sunya. It's a great void which is empty of all things. Continue on. Gods are not important in Buddhism. You know, the philosophy is you can believe in a God, but honestly, it can hinder your enlightenment, because as far as they're concerned, the gods are ignorant too. And they can hinder. Much of Buddhism is an atheistic worldview. All existence is Maya, complete illusion, which is nothingness of sunyata, the void. That in reality, this is all just an illusion. They believe in what's called the anatman, which is the non-self, that there is no true self. Salvation occurs by recognizing your place in the non-self, your place of non-self in the void. You know, again, this stuff just gets to be like, what does that even mean? How can you have a non-self? You know, especially if you don't exist. If you don't have an existence, then how can you even call it something?
Yeah, it's kind of circular.
You know, it gets really bizarre. Again, karma, we see that in as in Hinduism. All living things are subject to the law of karma, principle of cause and effect, controls the cycle of reincarnation, that wheel, the samsara, the wanderings. Again, there's reincarnation, but there is no soul, there is no Atman that returns to Brahman. In Buddhism, there are just sort of the chakras, the feelings, impressions, you know, present moments. You know, they're passed like a flame. You know, from one candle lighting to another, often called transmigration. You just sort of, and then eventually it's just blown out. You know, sort of that. It's almost like how flame has no substance. If you ever tried to hold on to a flame, even if you could do it, you know, without burning yourself, you couldn't hold it. There's no, you know, but it's there, but it has no, you know, it has no substance. So that's how they sort of compare it to this flame. And as you are reincarnated, you're just passing the flame along, you know, and eventually that flame just needs to be blown out. When you realize, when you come to the, you know, it's, in Hinduism, you can finally come to the realization that you are God, that you are part of Brahman, and then you return to Brahman. In Buddhism, you finally come to the realization that you don't exist, so you cease to exist.
That's a lot of study and enlightenment for
Yeah.
non-existence.
Yeah. Again, no one escapes samsara. By enlightenment, at death is blown out like a candle. Continuing realization of one's non-existence. That's, you know, that's how you reach nirvana, is by reaching this understanding of your non-existence. Here are the moral precepts, the 5 silas. The Buddhist must refrain from taking of life, all forms, not just human. This is that ahisma again.
Go back really quick.
Sure.
You said it. It's when, okay, blowing out like a candle, entering the realization of one's non-existence. So they achieve nirvana when they realize they don't exist. It has
Basically,
nothing, it doesn't have to do with a cycle of reincarnation where they pay.
well, it still
karma
goes, but it
for-
goes. You have to go through that cycle of reincarnation until you, because you can't reach that level of enlightenment in one go around. It takes a level. It takes a series of reincarnations and cycles through it all.
And so they believe in the same concept of karma as Hindu.
Yep. Yeah. Again, because it's really just an offshoot of Hinduism.
Okay.
He's just modified it. He's modified it to an extent that it's no longer can be considered Hinduism, but a lot of the same beliefs, a lot of the same core beliefs. There are moral precepts. When we talk about immorality, we're talking about particularly these 5 points. Taking of all life. Again, we have that ahisma, which is all life is sacred, all forms, not just human. You can't step on a fly. You can't, you know, kill an animal of any kind. Stealing, immoral sexual behavior, monks are celibate. Okay, lying, and the taking of intoxicants, alcohol and drugs.
Where do they come up with that list?
Again, these are interpretations of the Buddha's teachings. The goal of Buddhism, the immediate goal is to eliminate the cause of suffering, and the ultimate goal is nirvana, the non-existence, or the new existence, if you will. We're going to see there's several branches of Buddhism, but the beliefs uniting all Buddhists have to do with existence. Fundamental negative attitude toward life. Existence is the problem with life. Our false concept that we have true existence. That's the problem. Buddha, no matter how conceived, provides a solution to the frustrations of life. So Buddhism gets broken up now. We have Theravada, which means the path of the elders. It's also called Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle. And we'll explain why they use that term in a minute. This is sort of the traditional, they call it the path of the elders. This is the traditional, this is what Buddha wanted. This was is exclusive to the monks. Okay? It is called the lesser vehicle because there are less people in it. Because it only includes the monks. The Mahayana is called the greater vehicle because it stresses Buddha nature. It's sort of like the Buddha nature can be attained by all persons. You don't necessarily have to become a Buddha. They also believe in what's called the Bodhisattvas. The Bodhisattvas are people who have reached enlightenment and they're on the edge of nirvana, but rather than passing through into non-existence, they turn around and now they seek out to help people who are on earth. It would almost be, comparable to saints in Catholicism. They're just enlightened people. They're just like the Buddha, you know.
So, do they exist?
They, well, nothing. There is no existence. They exist in the sense that they are helping people to realize their own non-existence.
And they've come back out of non-existence.
Well, they didn't cross over into non-existence yet.
Oh, they didn't. These aren't.
They can, because they have understood it. They have reached that state of enlightenment where they realize their own non-existence. But rather than stepping over, because they've passed now, they've died, rather than stepping over into nirvana, they have turned around and now help those who are seeking enlightenment. And anybody can be enlightened, not just a monk. And the term Hinayana, or lesser vehicle, was actually originally sort of a derogatory comment, because they called themselves the greater vehicle. Look, we're including everybody. They called themselves the path of the elders, but they called themselves, well, we're the greater vehicle. They're the little vehicle. But now a lot of Theravada Buddhists actually embrace that term. Third major form is called the Vajrayana, which means the diamond vehicle. This is the Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama, and it's really it's what everybody thinks of when they think of Buddhism, but it really does not comprise most of Buddhism. It comprises a very small percentage of Buddhism. It is what we see in Tibet, you know, the monks in the robes, the Dalai Lama up on the mountain and all that. Very occultic. It's a mixture of Mahayana, the greater vehicle, mixed with Indian Tantra and occultic Bon religion. We're going to see in a minute that when we look into the Dalai Lama that there's some really weird occultic things going on, that he consults oracles to decide what's best for his people. And then Shingon Buddhism is derived from ancient Vajrayana. The Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, his name is Tenzin Gyatso, born in 1935. He was born a monk in Tibet. The Dalai Lama means ocean of wisdom. Okay, he was a monk of the Yellow Hat order. But what he is the reincarnation of the previous 13 Dalai Lamas. Every time the Dalai Lama dies, they start on a search. You know, there've been movies made about this. They go on a search. Who's going to be the next? Where did he go? He died. He's got to come back. He's got to be reincarnated. You know, unless he's been enlightened, and then they're going to. I don't know what they're going to do. You know, unless they believe maybe he's a bodhisattva, and that he's coming back to to help people. But he rules Tibet. I mean, he really is. There is sort of a tie-in with the state and the religion, so that he really is considered to be the ruler of Tibet. And there's all kinds of conflict going on. That's why he was forced out. 1959, he fled because of conflict with the ruling Chinese, and now he has the Tibetan government in exile out of India.
So, is he ruling Tibet?
He's ruling the people. Let's put it that way. They see him as their leader in exile.
They actually live in the country of Tibet.
Yeah. He's living in India, last I know of.
Oh, he lives in India.
Yeah, he's living in India, as far as I know. But he's done more to popularize Tibetan Buddhism in the West. That's why we know so much about it, because he's a happy-looking guy. Have you ever seen the pictures of him? He wears modern glasses. He just sort of looks like a regular guy in robes. You can almost see him sort of in a suit, because he just has a very Western look about him, and he's just friendly, and everyone seems to like him. You know, he said this to Christianity, to an interviewer for Christianity Today. Jesus Christ also lived previous lives, and that he reached a high state either as a bodhisattva or an enlightened person through Buddhist practice or something like that. This was his quote, what he believed about Jesus. But again, there's some really deep occultic things going on in Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama consults somebody called the I Ching Oracle, who is somebody who goes into these weird states where he froths at the mouth and goes into seizures, and then starts giving advice to the Dalai Lama as to how to rule his people. And the Dalai Lama takes that as authoritative. You know, rituals using the human remains and bodily excretions. You know, there's just weird stuff going on. Very, very occultic form of Buddhism. That's why most, you know, the Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists do not see this as traditional Buddhism. They see it as very occultic and cultic. You know, what we're most familiar with is what's called Zen Buddhism, which rejects the theoretical knowledge and sacred writings in favor of experiencing a sudden enlightenment, which is called Satori, through intensive seated meditation. And it just, you know, it's about emptying your mind, emptying yourself, quieting yourself, meditating, that you're not going to find enlightenment by understanding things, but rather, again, by these koans, like we were talking about before class. The little anecdotes and word puzzles, like what is the sound of one hand clapping, and they're always under the guidance of a Zen practitioner. One of the other koans that I read was, and this just shows you, it's like, you know, you don't know quite where they're going. They're like these pointless stories where there are these two Buddhist students, these two young apprentices, and they are both going to the vegetable market together. And one turns to the other and says, "Where are you going?" And he says, and the second one says, "Where my feet go." And so he's kind of puzzled by that. So he goes to his teacher and says, "You know, what do I say?" He said, "Well, next time, ask him, well, what if you have no feet?" So he goes, and the next day he says, "Where are you going?" And the other boy says, "Wherever the wind goes." And he's like, "Oh, that's not the answer I was expecting." And he goes back to his teacher, and his teacher says, "Well, next time ask him, what if there's no wind?" So then he sees him the next day, and he says, "You know, where are you going?" You know, they're on their way to the vegetable market again. He sees him, he says, "Well, I'm ready for him now." He says, "Where are you going?" And the other boy says, "I'm going to the vegetable market." That's the whole story. They're like these pointless stories that just don't seem to have, you know, any sense to it. Yet by repeating them and going over them and studying them, at some point it's going to click with you and you're going to get it. It's like, because you can't use knowledge and understanding to reach enlightenment. You have to go beyond it.
That's like a serious extreme version of a confirmation bias. Like they're just
Well, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of this. A friend of mine had was a missionary in Ukraine, and this Ukrainian guy started telling him a joke, and he was translating the joke in English. He was telling him the joke in English, and he's saying how this mushroom farmer was growing mushrooms on the side of a mountain, and somebody came by and said, "Yeah, what are you doing?" He says, "I'm growing mushrooms." And he said, "Yes, but are they your mushrooms?" And the Ukrainian guy just started laughing. He thought it was the most hilarious thing, the most hilarious joke he had ever heard in his life. And my friend was like, "What?" You know, and these koans are like that. They're like these stories that make no sense. You know, maybe in some other culture they were amusing, but they just, you know, but the Zen Buddhists have taken this as just sort of a way of emptying your mind so that you can achieve this, you know, sudden burst of enlightenment. it's very mystic. It's, it's very involved in mysticism. That enlightenment is found apart from words and explanations. That's why they try to find things that have no meaning and have no explanation, so that they can empty their mind. And that the knowledge is transmitted only from a master to a disciple. Think Yoda and Luke, on Dagobah. Just the pupil and the master. And that's how you can. I also think of, and this might be before your time. The TV series Kung Fu. Grasshopper. He was always trying to teach him lessons. When you can take the pebble from my hand, that kind of stuff. It was, very, very Zen. But it actually, funny thing is, it actually came through Japan.
It's Karate Kid. Catch the fly with a chopstick.
Yeah. Yeah, that was karate. But that has become very popular in the West, Zen Buddhism. Just for whatever reason, for the meditation reasons, or the idea of emptying your mind, and we're just trying to embrace all these Eastern philosophies. But it was imported from China and established as a separate school in Japan. And again, it's about sudden spontaneous enlightenment, the Satori. The experience of one's true nature, which is nothing. Even that is broken out into several schools, and then there's also the Soka Gakki International, the 20th century Japanese sect based on the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin. And these, again, are just other branches, minor branches of Buddhism. Emphasize the chanting of the Lotus Sutra. Some of these things we see that, Buddha started this more as a philosophy, and it has sort of devolved into these religious rituals and practices. Whereas Buddha was had a rule of conduct and had these, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, things to do, more about behavior, more about philosophy, and it has sort of devolved into these chantings and rituals and, and more religious type activities.
Kind of like the Hare Krishna?
Yeah, well, you know what? Even like Christianity. Christianity was once about, look, just spreading the gospel. Just tell the story of Jesus. Tell people about the glorious news of a Savior who died to save you of your sins. And now we're into
Latin chanting.
Rituals. Yeah, Latin chanting. Rituals, stand, sit, kneel. And it's not just the Catholics. I was sitting in a Methodist church, and they got this whole ritual of the candle lighting and and the robes and all that. It's like we have a tendency to devolve into this religious practice. So these are just more examples of Buddhism in the West. You can, because I just want to move along. You can look at the slides on your own thinking, just kind of see that some of them came out of a Vietnamese movement, etc. Just because the thing is, when you have a philosophy that is this loose, it's going to develop all kinds of splinters and practices. Okay, so we're going to move on to Chinese popular religion. Primarily, what we're going to be talking about is Confucianism and Taoism. But we have to understand, where it sort of came from. That, in China, religion became a synthesis of separate elements. Sort of folk religion. That's why it was called popular religion, because it's a religion of the people. It's really a religion that came out of the people. And in China, originally, there was monotheism. Almost all cultures began with a philosophy or a stand or a position of monotheism. It's just it's the logical progression that we start. People have thought that things started with polytheism and then we moved to monotheism. It's not true. When even the anthropologists who study religions realize most cultures begin with a monotheistic God and then devolve into polytheism and pantheism and
Is that similar to the Native American religions?
Not so much. We're going to see that when we get into Shinto. Because Native American religion has to do, it's more animist. Has to do with, you know, the god in the tree and the god in the river and the god in the plants and in the wolf and all that kind of stuff. This is just what was needed at the time. Is basically what it is. What the people needed and what the people embraced. And it wasn't necessary. There's no, you know, we're going to see some leaders in it. You know, as we see a couple of different religions sort of pop up. But it's really about what the people embraced. But there are two distinctive traits. When we talk about Chinese popular religion, and the thing is, it's like I said, it's a synthesis. They sort of combine things together. They take their culture and their traditions, and they sort of borrow it and move it into some sort of a religious practice. But we'll see when we get through it. Two distinctive traits is one, close relationship between state and religion. Because it's all about, you're going to see that it's all about how do we make a better society. And how we make a better society ultimately is reflected in how our government is going to run, how the rulers will rule the country. So there's a very close relationship between the religion and the state. The other one is the emphasis on divination, seeking the unknown through supernatural means. You know, trying to find out what's true by contacting either the dead or through spirits.
So there's some spiritism.
Yeah, spiritism, and you know, and we're going to see that because there's an emphasis placed on balance, the yin and the yang, which is expressed by the Tao. It's spelled with a T, but it's pronounced the Tao. The Tao is the way. It's just the way that things work. It's the way. And that sort of is the basis of the religions that we're going to look at. Is that there is sort of this underlying way. It's almost like a river, a flow of things. Is learning how to get into the right flow of the way things already are. And the Tao is sort of expressed in this book called the I Ching, which is typically ascribed to Confucius. The Book of Changes. It talks about a lot of things, but it talks about this path, this flow of things, and it talks about the yin and the yang, which are like the passive and the dominant. It's not good and evil. It's not dualism. Yin and yang is not about good and evil, because with yin and yang, good is out of balance. Good is balance. Evil is out of balance. It has nothing to do with one being yin is evil, yang is good, and it has to do with opposites.
And what is good balancing?
The yin and the yang. It's you know, there's passive forces and there's strong forces. And we'll get into a little bit more about what the yin and the yang is, some of the different examples. But it's about that the world is made up of these opposing forces, and that it's not about choosing the good one against the bad one, but it's about creating a balance. You know, in the I Ching it talks about 3 unbroken sticks. It's like this: they would take sticks and they would throw it on the ground. You know, and if they would throw the 3 broken and 3 unbroken sticks. And if the 3 unbroken ones lined up like this, that's considered all yang. And it's off balance, it's all yang. You know, if the 3 unbroken sticks, it's like this, line up like this, well, that's all yin. And that's out of balance. What you want to see is you know, something like, you know, or, you know, this is like, you know, less yin, more yang, but somewhat of a balance. This is more yin, less yang, but it's a balance. And, you know, and this is considered earth, this is considered sky. See, you get the hard and then the air. But then, you know, things like this would be considered things like fire and water. Water is a little more yang, it's a little more solid. But it's not completely solid, so it's got some yin in it. Fire is you know, very non-solid, so it's got more yin, you know, but it's there. It's not. It's more than air, so it's got some yang in it, you know. So it's about it's about finding the balance, you know. Out of the popular religions, there were 4 Chinese schools. There were the Moists, teaching of Mozi, which rivaled Confucianism. It was right around the same time, just a little bit before Confucianism, preached that preaching that embraced the principle of all-pervasive universal love would restore the empire. You have to remember at this time, Chinese empire was made up of all these little kingdoms, these little dynasties, and some would overpower, and then another one would overpower. And they talk about the Yin dynasty and the Qin dynasty and the Shang dynasty, you know, all these dynasties were because these different groups would take authority. They would take dominance, and it was just a nation of warring factions. So they were trying to find a way to restore the empire to one, you know. Then we had the legalists called the Faya, proposed resolving problems through the empire through strong government. You know, severe punishments for crimes. The emperor should have absolute power, and rebellion should be, you know, suppressed. And then we have Confucianism. Founder's name was Kongfuzi, which eventually became Confucius as it mixed with Latin. And then Taoism. Key figure in Taoism is a sage called Lao Tzu. Came a little later, but was probably a contemporary of Confucius. Supposedly wrote a book. We're going to see that there's doubt as to whether or not he ever even existed. But supposedly wrote the Tao Te Ching, the book of the way and its power, a compilation of his wisdom. Again, the Tao means the way.
Is it spelled with a D or a T?
It's really spelled with a T.
Okay.
It can be spelled either way. It's pronounced with a D. So that's why it can be done either way, but it's saying the same thing. So we have Confucianism, not Confucianism, but Confucianism. Founder is Kongfuzi. One of the most influential people in Chinese history. He was a politician who studied history and philosophy, but he was exiled after what was called political intrigues. There was very little about what it was that was the problem. Could have been just, you know, changing of parties. It could have been that he was accused of something. Could have been that he made some people unhappy, and they exiled him. Well, he went out and spent years as an itinerant teacher, and then returned to government and started proposing some of his philosophies to the current government, and it was actually picked up. And the basis of it is what's called punctilious duty, which is doing the right things rightly. It's about finding out what is the right thing and then doing it at the right time, in the right way, all the time. Some of the other historical figures in Confucianism, Mengzi, or Mencius as he's called, a philosopher now who emphasized striving for the common good. And then we have Zhongzi, a philosopher who emphasized the evil of human nature and the need for ritual and authority. So we're going to see that Confucianism is really just a philosophy of life. It was never meant to be about a religion. There's no God involved in this. There's no spiritual things involved in it. It's really just a set of rules and ways of looking at things. There are 4 books, the major sacred writings. The Analects of Confucius, again, just compiled by his disciples shortly after his death. The Great Learning, attributed to Confucius and Zhengzi. The Doctrine of the Mean by Zizi, and the Book of Mencius, which we just read that Mencius was another influential character in Confucianism. Other important writings is the Book of Filial Piety, because we're going to see that Confucius saw relationships, proper relationships, understanding what the proper order of relationships was between people, depending on who they are, was vital. And filial piety, filial piety was one of the most important things, which was basically it's respect for your father. You know, the sons need to have piety toward their fathers, which lined up with the already existing Chinese tradition of ancestral veneration. You know, you respect your elders, you respect your father, you respect your grandfather, you know, with piety, to the point that you would venerate them after their passing. And then the 5 classics, a collection which includes Classic of Changes, or the I Ching that we talked about, which is a system of divination. It's, again, finding the balance in the yin and the yang. So we have Confucius's 5 relationships that he lined out. And this is what he said. This is how the way things should be done in social life. Father and son, okay, is exemplified by the father being loving and the son being pious. Father's loving toward the son is pious towards his father. We have the elder and the younger. The elder brother is gentle towards his younger brother. The younger brother is humble toward the older brother. The husband is good or righteous toward his wife, and the wife is obedient to her husband. An elder, particularly like an older friend, is considerate toward the younger, and the younger is deferential. He defers to the elder. And then a ruler and subject, the ruler is benevolent, supposed to be benevolent to the subject, and the subject should be loyal to the ruler. So he basically said his rule was order. Everything in order and things will work out, because again, it's tied to society. It's not about achieving some enlightenment, achieving some level of you know, like we've been studying in Buddhism and Hinduism, or you know, it's not some level of salvation. It's really just about how to live in an orderly life, how to live in happiness by having all things in order in your life. Again, respect for age. Age gives all things their worth, objects, institutions, and individual lives. Eventually, Confucius was seen as a god because of ancestral veneration. He wouldn't have had a problem with it. You know, even though he wasn't really concerned about the gods, he felt that veneration of the elders, the long since passed elders, was proper. And that meant praying to them, that meant still giving them honor and respect, and even making sacrifices to them and rituals toward them. Again, not everyone considers Confucianism an actual religion. He didn't speak of God or gods, you know, and despite the fact that he and nearly 200 of his disciples and sages are now worshipped in Confucian temples. You know, like anything else, it devolved. It became a religion. And they built temples to worship these masters. Purpose of life and salvation, you know, while he did uphold the Chinese concept of heaven, the overarching spiritual reality, Confucius was a humanist, concerned with ethical behavior in government and interpersonal relationships. He was more concerned about things in this life. He said, okay, maybe there's a heaven, there's probably a heaven. That was, you know, at least their concept of heaven. And he had a consideration for that, but that wasn't his main concern. His main concern was, how do we have a better existence here? Harmony of the perfected individual within a well-ordered society. His teachings can be summed up as ethical humanism. He also taught that a truly superior man is motivated by righteousness instead of profit. You know, his idea was, if we want a better society, and in theory, this philosophy is not too far off the mark. He said, in order to have a better society, we have to change people from the inside. And if we can get ourselves to think the right way, do the right things, and be right on the inside, then society will be much better. Theoretically, that's a great plan. It's the same plan that Karl Marx had. The problem is you can't get everybody to do that. Outside of Christ, outside of the power of the Holy Spirit doing a work in your heart. It's like today, everybody wants to be an activist, a conservative activist, and we've got to change these laws. No, you got to change people's hearts. The only way you're going to change the laws is if you change people's hearts.
Or you have the other side, like libertarianism, do no harm. Well, it's a great theory, but how are you going to get people to do that?
And we're going to find out that's Taoism.
Interesting.
Just don't do anything. Leave everything alone. Just do nothing. Things work out better if you just leave everything alone. As a balance. Confucius just thought that man could achieve some level of perfection if he tried hard enough. And that's where he runs into problems. He didn't speak of an afterlife of the soul, but he condoned the ancient Chinese practice of ancestor worship, but more as an ethical system of respect for the dead. So whether or not he even believed that they were there to receive it, we don't even know. He more than likely just said, it's just a good practice for us here to show respect for the dead. An emphasis on cultivating filial piety again. Love and respect for anyone's parents and ancestors adhering to the laws of nature. Two important points in Confucianism is the Ren and the Li. And this is another one of those things. It's spelled with a J, but it's pronounced like Ren, like the bird. The Ren and the Li. The Ren is the attitude of seeking the welfare of other people, short of self-sacrifice. It's like, care about people. Don't go too far. Don't sacrifice your own needs for other people, but as much as you can, care about other people. He practiced what we call the silver rule. What's the golden rule? Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you.
Right.
Silver rule is, don't do to other people what you wouldn't want them to do to you.
That's like the categorical imperative.
Yeah, well...
In Kant.
Yeah, it's...
Do not will upon others what you would not have them will upon you.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking the golden rule, but just flipping it the other way into a negative, That's the Ren. The Ren is seeking the welfare of others, and then Li is doing the right thing at the right time. Propriety. Correct manners, dress, speech, body posture, and even facial expressions. If we have Ren and we have Li, and they're in balance, and you do them both, if you practice them, you have the ideal human society, because that's the goal, is societal utopia. Again, he was trying to create a society. He wasn't necessarily trying to lead people to heaven. He wasn't trying to create enlightenment per se. He was trying to make China a better place to live. So breakups of Confucianism, new Confucian movement, 20th century stuff. Again, I'm going to let you just look at this on your own, because we're going to have to get moving here. We're getting a little late. This is not necessarily super important stuff. Adherence is about 300 million Chinese consider themselves Confucians today. Besides mainland China, Confucianism has a significant influence in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Okay, so now we have Taoism, which is the other prominent, and this really, what's the word I'm looking for? It replaced, if you will, supplanted, I guess is the word I'm looking for, Confucianism as the state religion, the state belief system, shortly after, once it came into, particularly by 440 AD. So a couple of hundred years after Confucianism was well established, Taoism began moving in, and by 440 AD it became the state religion. Adherents, about 200 million people worldwide today, mostly in China, but growing steadily in North America, particularly in California, I have to say. Origins of Taoism, the Tao is the way, talked about that. 6th century BC, reaching near final form around the 2nd century BC. The founder was a man, Lao Tzu, which means the old man. He was believed to have been born at the age of 72 with gray hair and wrinkles. And that's just the way he was. He was just, he was a contemporary of Confucius, probably toward the end of Confucius's life, although his true identity and historicity is in doubt. His most famous saying is, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step." Revolutionary thought. Other historical figures, Zhuangzi, it was Lao Tzu's noted disciple, popularized the Tao, defining it as the spiritual process, the constant flow of give or take. The Tao Te Ching, ascribed by Lao Tzu, the legend said that he wrote it at the behest of a gatekeeper. He decided he was going to go on a journey. Maybe this is where he came up with that line, that he was going to go on a journey. And when he reached the borders of China, there was a gatekeeper that says, well, before I can let you leave, I need you to write down everything that you've learned in your life. Write down your wisdom. And he sat and wrote down the Tao Te Ching. And that's where it came from. That's why this, you know, whether or not he even existed, we don't even know. The Zhuangzi was a series of essays ascribed by the author of the same name. Popularized Taoism as an alternative to state religion, which was Confucianism at the time, and there was a lot of people were not happy with the government. You know, there was a lot of dissension, and people were happy to begin to accept some other new philosophy in place of the state religion. You know, some larger works, the Tao Te Ching, Treasury of the Tao. A lot of these, again, are just compilations of things that people said that Lao Tzu said, or that different philosophers, that Zhuangzi said, compilations of works. Key beliefs. Taoism is polytheistic. Believes in many gods, multi-godism, worship of deities such as the Jade Emperor. Lao Tzu himself came to be venerated as a deity along with many other immortals. There's like a list of immortals that are worshipped in Taoism. Purpose of life and salvation for Taoism. The doctrines vary widely and include numerous naturalistic or mystical Asian beliefs. It's the way that life flows. Again, it took the yin, the yang, and it really emphasized it. It really took it to the nth degree. The yin is weak, disorganized, while yang is active, strong, and integrative. You know, so things that are sort of wish-washy and, you know, somebody who is very passive and, you know, doesn't have a real strong personality, they would be considered very yin. Somebody who's got a very forceful, strong personality, that's very yang. And the idea is to find the balance, the harmony between, and you can only do this through meditation and through what's called the Wu Wei, which is doing nothing. You know, it says that it's alignment with the Tao, revealing the smooth, invisible power within all things. Ultimately, they say that you want to return to the form of a piece of uncarved wood. You know, that you're too busy. You've been. It's like sort of returning to your original state before you got confused. You know, clarity of mind, if you will. And they do this by doing nothing. Leave everything alone, and things will get better. You know. Where are we here? Again, the Tao lies beyond words and categories. Posing values and judgments are just arbitrary standards. If you say that's a bad thing, well, who are you to say that that's a bad thing? Just leave it alone. You know, those are just arbitrary standards that you came up with. And the only response is no judgments at all. Their theory is that laws create thieves, so do nothing. If you know, that everything plays against the other. And if you didn't make a law against theft, nobody would steal. You know, because they say the only reason that that anger exists is because people believe in happiness. You know, that the only reason that poverty exists is because people espouse wealth. You know, and that everything plays against the other. You know, and some things are related, but you know, they believe that everything is related that way. The only reason that extremes exist is because somebody is playing against the other extreme. And that's why things, and so that's why they say just leave it alone, do nothing. Just let the flow. Let it, you know, this is a little bit like Star Wars too, you know. Just embrace the Force. Don't let the dark side, don't let this side, you just sort of get in the flow of it and do nothing. You know, give yourself over to it. Only he that rids himself forever of desire can see the secret essences. That sound familiar?
Yeah, I was just thinking that it was more kind of like the desire thing in Buddhism.
It was Buddhism, and it was around the same time that Lao Tzu supposedly was putting together his philosophy that Buddhism was becoming prominent. So he may have borrowed it, who knows, you know, maybe Lao Tzu and Gautama got together and talked. Combines elimination of desire with meditative techniques. You know, there are some occult practices involved, include spirit possession, mediumship, divination, again, employing the I Ching, you know, the throwing of the sticks, astrology, feng shui. We get feng shui. You know, people do that, and in the house, and you know, you see it on the HGTV now. You know, you gotta have the proper flow of things in the house. You know, Taoism also influenced Chinese martial arts, Tai Chi, and traditional medicine. Those two, the two big, really, the two main Chinese religions. And again, everyone sort of practices them in their own way. They're popular. They're Chinese popular religions. You know, you can practice them in whatever way you want, because they're religions that were embraced by the people. You know, they weren't necessarily concentrating on a particular deity or even a particular spiritual attainment. It was more about philosophy and people embracing whatever philosophy they thought would make things better. Lastly, we're looking into Shinto. Origins from the Chinese Shin Tao, the way of the gods. Shinto is a native animist religion dating to 500 BC or earlier. The founder, there's really no founder. Shinto creation legends tell of native deities called the kami, who founded the islands of Japan as a Now, what happened was this: there were Buddhist migrations moving into Japan. People were embracing Buddhism, and the emperor did not want Japan to lose its culture. So he called for one of his men to research. Say, look, what do we know about Japanese, because even today, the Japanese are not terribly religious people. But they said, but they're very culturally strong people. So he said, you know, what's in our history about our religions? What do we have? So this servant went and started researching and archiving and finding things, and found that, you know, there were these legends, there were these stories. You know, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki. These were works that talked about how the kami sort of came out. These gods sort of appeared and founded the islands of Japan. So he began to promote this philosophy of the kami. You know, these are some of the sacred texts. The Riko Kushi, the 6 national histories. Again, it's talking about the history of Japan and the historical culture. You know, we get some of these other writings, some of these were further on, 1338, the Jino Shatoki. Basically, the way it works is that God is regarded not as a personal creator, non-theistic, but as a force behind the kami spirits. Okay, and these kami spirits, you know, what happened was the yin and the yang, again, there's no personality here, but these forces of yin and yang, the balance, intermixed, and the kami emerged in male and female pairs and began to multiply until there were dozens of them. And these spirits, you know, animated nature. They created the world. And so that's why, you know, this is really an animistic religion, because they believe that these spirits exist in the rocks and the trees and the streams. It's sort of a combination of pantheism and polytheism. But it's really more animistic, because they believe that these spirits, it's pantheistic in the sense that they don't believe in a personal deity. They believe that there's these many spirits, but they're not personal. They don't have intent and a mind. They're just sort of impersonal forces that animated the universe and created everything that we see. So they exist within these things. But it's not just one force. It's not like the monists that we learned about, or the pantheists, in that there's only one thing that exists. These are many things, but they're not personal. There are many deities, but they're not personal deities. So there's more than a dozen major kami. These are some of the names in them. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, representing the rising of Japan's national flag. We see you've seen the Japanese national flag, the rising sun. It's really one of the kamis. It's a symbol for one of the kamis.
Did anime come out of this at all?
The term may have, you know, it's
Just like a cultural,
I don't know, because it's,
cultural
you know,
kind of religion, or
well, I don't even, because, you know, I mean, we use the word animated
yeah.
because animated, and this is what, you know, it's called animism. Animated means making something alive. You know, we take something that isn't alive, like a cartoon, we make it move and we make it talk, and it's called animation. You know, we take something that's not alive and make it alive. And they may have just used that sort of Western terminology to call anime, because anime, I still don't know what the difference between anime and, what's the other one?
I don't know.
There's 2 different terms. One is if it's a cartoon, one of it is if it's in a comic book. They have 2 different terminologies for that whole kind of animation that they do. But it's in their culture, you know. That's why it's, you know, it's probably really, that may be why it's so popular. They also believe in emperor worship. Akihito, son of Hirohito, who was the emperor during World War II, is still regarded as divine by some Japanese. Now today, a lot of Japan is just very secular and humanist. They don't necessarily practice Shinto. They still would consider it their national religion, because culturally it's who they are. You know, they have shrines. They have the kami shrines. They're presided over by Shinto priests. Each shrine is dedicated to a specific kami who is said to respond to sincere prayers of the faithful. Prayers to the kami are offered for all life's difficulties and blessings. You know, they recognize sacred places, mountains, springs, significant historical locations. They have celebrations, Matsuri festivals held in Japan throughout the year. And there's probably, it says that there's more than 24 different Shinto schools, denominations. About 85% of Japan's population of 127 million embraces Shinto and Buddhism. Nearly all followers are Japanese. Very few non-Japanese convert. Shinto has influenced many so-called new religions exported from Japan to the Americas and Western Europe, including Mahikari, Perfect Liberty, Kaidan, Church of World Messianity, and Siko no Lei. These, again, the importance of understanding these Eastern religions. And next week we're going to get into some, we're going to be talking about the non-traditional religions, the cults, that are probably more familiar to us in their ideology. Some of them are still out there. I mean, Scientology is pretty out there, but somehow it seems to fit the Western mind better than some of this stuff. These things get into some very, for my mind, nonsensical stuff. It's particularly when they say, well, it really has nothing to do with anything that's really out there. It's just a way of practicing your life. And that's what most of the Japanese would say.
But on the other hand, Scientology is sensical.
Well, I'm not saying that it's sensible. I'm just saying the concepts of it are more attractive to the Western mind. It embraces some Eastern philosophies, sort of the mental aspect of things, and the non rigid sense of existence, but it's still, look, if it didn't make sense to the Western mind, it wouldn't be embraced the way it does. Although the Western mind is now really starting to embrace Eastern philosophy more and more, and this came out during the time in the '60s when that was becoming very popular with the Beatles and everybody sort of embracing the Eastern philosophy. Scientology is probably going to be one of the most Eastern type philosophies that we're going to study. Most of what we're going to be talking about are some Christian cults, Christian offshoots, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, which again, I'm not saying that they all make sense. I mean, Mormonism's pretty out there, but it's sort of based on a Judeo-Christian mindset. These are just coming from a whole different way of thinking, and I think the most significant thing is understanding the ploy of Satan behind these type of philosophies. Because what it does is it compromises the underpinnings of even thinking. It's like, I've heard Ravi Zacharias say, people they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars getting a university education, and basically they come out of it not knowing anything. And being told that they cannot know anything. You just spent 4 to 8 years of your life spending thousands of dollars for someone to tell you that you cannot know anything.
Come to the conclusion of nihilism.
Yeah.
That's great.
You can't even, and here's the professor coming up to the podium and he's saying, look, you can't even trust what I'm saying. And it makes the student wonder, well, what am I doing here? And this is this Eastern sort of mindset that's moving in, that's permeating in. Because what it does is it just knocks out the underpinnings of society and our way of looking at things, where we can't, it gets to the point where you can't have a conversation. It's very difficult to have an evangelical conversation, to try to share the gospel with somebody of this kind of Eastern mindset. Because they won't even argue with you. They'll just say, oh, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. That's very interesting.
And they don't get upset?
No, they're not going to get now an American person espousing this might, because
Yeah.
Americans are still trying to,
To win.
the Western mind is still trying to grasp a lot of this stuff. So you might, if you do that with somebody who's sort of who's learning this stuff, but if somebody has really embraced it, you know, and Satan has really come in and compromised their way of thinking, there's no way, you can't get into an intelligent discussion with them, because there's no way to have a logical progression of thought with them. You can't say, well, if this is true, then this is true. And if this is true, then this is true. Because they'll be saying, well, that doesn't, just because this is true doesn't mean that's true. They can both be true. They can neither be true. One can be true sometimes, and then it's not true tomorrow. You know, and there's just no, how do you even follow a path? How do you track with somebody like that? Because they're not, you know, everything is so open. And, you know, even in the Chinese religions, it's all just about, let's just think about stuff. It has no bearing on reality. It all has to do, it's all very selfish oriented. It's all about me achieving some enlightenment, me reaching some level of understanding. You know, rather than the Christian point of view, which is me realizing that I need a Savior, realizing that I'm a sinner, that there is one God who loves me and wants to spend eternity with me, but I'm in trouble because I'm a sinner and I need a Savior. And you can only come to that place when you have an understanding of what truth is. Because you can't even have a concept of what sin is. You can't have a concept about justification, about righteousness, about any of this stuff without some solid pillars on which to build some kind of understanding of truth. And what these things do is they just knock all those pillars out and say, forget all these understandings of what is true, what is not true. None of that's important. Truth is relative. Truth is irrelevant. It's what do you get out of it? What can you attain in practicing and seeking out some of these philosophies? And that's, you know, that's why it's important for us to just get our brain around it as much as we can, understanding where these people are coming from, because they are so lost. You know, it's not even, you know, it's not even like we speak the same language. We can speak the same language, but we're not speaking the same language. You know, my brother-in-law espouses Taoism. I mean, he does it in his own way. He's kind of a California kid, you know, and you know, combines Taoism with Timothy Leary.
Which is?
Well, Timothy Leary was the drug doctor of the '60s. You know, you know, tune in, you know, tune out, tune in, tune out, turn in, tune out, whatever. You know, he was just all about helping people get high. LSD. He created LSD.
Oh wow.
Anyway, that's just kind of my brother-in-law's philosophy. But he loves Taoism. You know, I think because he's lazy. It just means do nothing. And that's just it. People love to espouse some of these philosophies here in America because they're novel, they're chic. You know, I'm a Buddhist. You know,
There's nothing new under the sun.
yeah, there's nothing new under the sun, and they think it's new because it's you know, and they'll say, well, I'm a Buddhist. They probably don't even know what that means. If you were to ask them, are you a Theravada? Are you a Mahayana? Are you a Vajrayana? I'm a Buddhist. You know, most people don't even know. They just do it because it makes them feel good. It's all about, and this is Satan's ploy, is always to get you thinking about yourself. What's good for me? Not what is true, but what is good for me. And that's, you know, as benign as some of these things may seem, as kind-hearted as some of these people might come off as. You know, they're all very gentle, seemingly selfless people, but their selflessness is for the purpose of self-promotion. Because if they are, you know, if they are selfish, I mean, if they are selfless, then they will attain enlightenment. So it's, you know, basically it just still all comes down to me trying to do something for myself. So next week, we're going to begin talking about Scientology, Unitarian Universalists, those guys. I think we're going to save the Christian ones for the end, for the last class. So, you know, for those out there online, just start working on your papers, get that last paper in. We still have a couple of weeks to get everything done, and we've got a final to take, which is not going to be very difficult, but we've got to get all these things wrapped up. And we do have a discussion question this week. But no more paper other than the final paper at the end of the course. All right? All right. See you next week.